But yeah, Leverkusen gives us tons to talk about, and I think it's a similar kind of story than we've seen a few times now this season, where they do take the lead and they seem to be comfortable cruising. They actually scored the third that was chalked off, right? And
Mm.
then their opponent scores one goal, eventually scores a second. Leverkusen pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed and pushed. And unlike last year, when they maybe scored a late winner, that's just not happening this year. And because of that, they've been dropping points. And I mean, the good news for them is that ultimately that's not a big deal yet, because it's only 3 points behind Bayern Munich, right? But I think it is concerning that this Leverkusen team isn't necessarily quite up to speed. And, you know, again, they're doing this after they've beaten Milan 1-0 in the Champions League, which I thought was a really strong and mature performance. But where they were all business last year in these games, they just don't seem to have the ability to see the matches out the same way that they did last year. And I think that is a really big concern for Javi Alonso. Because last year, even if Holstein Kiel had made it 2-1 or even scored the equalizer, you could have put money on Leverkusen still finding a winner. And that's just not happening this year.
Yeah, I think the big issue for Leverkusen this season is that they look tired.
Yeah.
And I think the bigger issue that is keeping probably Xabi Alonso up at night is that his backup players just simply aren't stepping up when called upon. I thought it was really telling that Robert Andrich was kind of brought in as a kind of central defender in this game because the young defender Belashian kind of didn't do tremendously well when he started in previous games. Mukiele has also kind of dropped. Obviously, Frimpong came back in. Hoffman's been brought in as well. He scored a goal. He did okay, but you know, Alonso is still kind of shifting that team from one to the next, quite a lot from one game to the next. He's obviously trying to share the load of these players. For a lot of them have played a lot of football. A lot of them quite tired. For example, Granit Xhaka basically finished the Euros with, one of his legs hanging by a thread. His ankle, I think it was completely mashed up in that England game. So, there's that concern. And
Yeah.
you only have to look at the first goal that Kiel score is just a header, which Robert Andrich completely loses his man. And
Yeah. And I
that's a
thought
little weird.
Radetzky could have done better too.
Yeah, exactly. But if it was Hincapie in there instead of, I mean, obviously Andrich would probably still be on the pitch, but he wouldn't probably be marking that guy perhaps because he wouldn't be a
Yeah.
central defender. So if Hincapie had been marking him, then maybe he stops that header. But the other issue as well is just how the other issue that I think is a real problem for Leverkusen is that their two central defenders that they relied so much on last season, Tapsoba and Jonathan Tah, seem to be taking turns to just have these absolutely wild performances from one week to the next. And it's definitely worth looking up the lead up to the penalty for Holstein Kiel, because yes, it's Frimpong who ultimately gives away the penalty, but he really spared Jonathan Tah's blushes because Jonathan Tah gets pulled apart by the Kiel attacker. And to kind of put it into some sort of words that might paint a picture for people, think of Jerome Boateng against Lionel Messi. That kind of, faltering and basically you kind of lose your moment, you lose your kind of footing and just end up collapsing in front of the attacking player. That's what Jonathan Tah did in lead up to that goal. And that's not the first time that he's looked very slow or very cumbersome this season. Tapsoba has looked pretty dreadful in games as well. Mukiele kind of knocked their own goal in last week. It's just this kind of catalogue of errors at Leverkusen, and that's without even talking about Hradecki, who we've already mentioned this season hasn't looked like his old self. Well, not his old self. No, he has looked like his old self.
Exactly.
He didn't look like superhuman Hradecki who we got last season. So there are problems there. But I wrote my newsletter last week on this idea that I suspect the Leverkusen probably have all their eyes on the Champions League this year, but that obviously doesn't excuse dropping 2 points to Holstein Kiel. And I think Leverkusen will be really, really thankful for this international break, because I feel like Xabi Alonso feels like he's got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, and I mean, it's really interesting that the only team that didn't drop points on this weekend playing in the Champions League was Leipzig. And I actually thought their performance unlike Leverkusen, unlike Bayern, unlike Dortmund, and unlike Stuttgart, was very mature throughout the entire 90 minutes. There was moments where, Heidenheim pushed and was able to get goals, should have maybe scored, but Heidenheim isn't a pushover. We all know how good they are now, right? And they also played midweek, right? And won their first game in Europe. But like what I'm thinking about that, it's really interesting that of all these top teams, they were the only ones to have figured it out this weekend. And sometimes winning the title is about, in the Bundesliga especially, is about the other top teams being weak. Last year it was Dortmund and Bayern who really slipped up by quite a bit, and Stuttgart and Leverkusen were the two teams that had benefited from it. Maybe we're seeing something similar again after the Euros, because I think what's going on with Leverkusen, as you said, maybe their priorities are a little bit different. The Champions League is important for the club and in terms of, what they can achieve in terms of marketing, etc. But that might mean that their eyes aren't on the Bundesliga as much as they were in the previous year. And so if you are then Leipzig, that is something you can benefit from, because I don't think this Bayern Munich team is as good as they're attacking wise, and I think they're probably the favorites now, but they'll be dropping points left, right, and center. So I think it's just a really interesting phenomenon that out of all these teams that we're playing in the Champions League midweek, only Leipzig collected all 3 points.
Yeah. I mean, I think what really sums up Leverkusen's issues right now is if you actually go through the players they signed this summer, not a single one of them has really done it. I would go so far as to say not a single one of them's had a single good performance. They've obviously got Nordi Mukiele, who's coming from loan for PSG, who I said, scored on goal a few weeks ago. Belician, the young centre defender, who had to come off. I think it was maybe last weekend, or maybe it was against Wolfsburg. Some a terrible game. Alex Garcia equally hasn't really got going yet. And Martin Terrier continues to start games and then gets substituted off in the second half, to which I think, was he playing? In a number of games, he's kind of been given starting roles to do very, very little. So I think that's something that Alonso will know he has to work on. And maybe this clicks and maybe these guys do get into... I mean, it'd be very surprising if all 4 flopped. But if 2 or 3 of them start to put in some decent performances going forward, then that could be a huge impetus to get Leverkusen back to where they have to be this season. But as things stand, Alonso just doesn't have the backup players and to cover for the fact that a lot of his star players look quite jaded right now, and it's costing them points. And we talked about that point they got away to Bayern Munich last weekend, and I was kind of saying that if you want to look at it pragmatically, Alonso would have been delighted with that performance because it meant he took a point. But that point's completely pointless. If you avoid the pun, if you excuse the pun, if they're then going to drop 2 points against Holstein Kiel 7 days later, So I'm sure Alonso will be furious about that, and he'll have a lot of work to do during the international break, just like Kompany, just like Nuri Sahin.
Yeah, maybe the team that will be laughing this year will be either Leipzig or Frankfurt. All these other teams continuously shooting themselves in the foot.
Yeah, well, it shows how much things are kind of moving very quickly, because a few weeks ago we were talking about how RB Leipzig's season was already up in flames, and now look at them. So
remarkable.
Yeah, it's been a great start to the season for the neutrals and for us to watch. I'll put it that way.
Well, the thing is, and is my final thought about all of this, is a very poor Leipzig side by their own standards is only second by goal differential. That is kind of wild.
Yeah, and what I would give Leipzig credit for is, yes, they're struggling to score goals, but defensively they've been outstanding. I think they've got the best defensive record in the league. They've conceded 5 fewer goals than Bayern Munich. They've conceded 9 fewer goals than Borussia Dortmund, 10 fewer than Leverkusen. So
yeah,
Marco Rose has got something right. He's got foundations there. Like we said in the past, they are still, I think, far too reliant on Xavi Simons. It seems to be his team, and they only do well when he plays or plays well. But at least they have that defence to fall back on, which might do them well over the course of a season, as opposed to these other teams who, Dortmund, Bayern and Leverkusen, don't seem... You could take all 3 of those squads, I think you'd struggle to put together a solid backline between them right now. That's how drastic things have gone.
I think Marco Rose, if they had told him you are going to be ahead of Dortmund, Stuttgart, Leverkusen, and even on points at the top of the table by the second international break, he would have signed that. You know, I think there would have been no doubt. Anyone in Leipzig would have said, "Yeah, that sounds like a good start to the season to us." So yeah, I mean, good for them. They have made the most of a situation where every other club has struggled. So, and it's great for us and every other neutral in the Bundesliga because it makes the table very interesting.